Hello, this is Sarah, Sarastrology, and in this video I'm going to tell you about the sign of Aries, the first house, the planet Mars, and the ascendant. But first, for those of you who are not familiar with how the signs and houses work, I will explain that to you. So the signs of the zodiac reflect the constellations they are named after, while the houses move around the entire zodiac in one day and are based on the particular time and location of one's birth, while the signs are based on date. So in chart form, the signs of the zodiac will basically stay stationary in one place, while the houses move around it. So the houses actually form cusps in each sign, which is how we get when we say, first house cusp, we mean basically that the first house, the beginning of the first house, is in some particular sign. The houses incorporate many of the same subjects as the signs, with the first house roughly equaling Aries, and the 12th house roughly equaling Pisces, and all of those house numbers 1 through 12, and all the signs in between equaling to that number in the order that they are on the wheel. There are basic differences which differentiate houses and signs. A sign will define a particular characteristic or way in which a point or planet behaves, while a house will define in which area of a person's life it affects. And the way in which it affects it is very much like in a previous video when I explained the signs and houses and how each of them are basically just a progression through a phase of our lives. 1 degree per every 2 months of a person's life. Using the houses in a natal chart can give you almost like a second set of interpretations to work with. For example, your sun could be in Leo, but also in the 12th house. So then your 12th house cusp, or your 11th house cusp actually, could be in Leo. And this is kind of interesting because Leo would correspond to technically the 5th house, and the opposite of the 5th house, or also the opposite of Leo, is Aquarius. So if your sun is in Leo and in the 11th house, so then your 11th house cusp is in Leo, you would incorporate almost the same characteristics of the sign of Leo and the 11th house cusp, which is a very interesting idea, and it kind of broadens interpretations and makes them more, I think, unique and individual. Also can illustrate how us as humans we incorporate every sign. We all have a little bit of Aries in us, we all have a bit of Pisces in us, we all have a bit of Cancer, Taurus, it doesn't matter who you are, we all have a bit of that inside, so we are all one in the signs. It's just astrology, or the interpretations of astrology basically just tell us what's going to stand out the most, but we all incorporate these same characteristics and these same ways of just being a human being. But so for this video, I'm going to start with the first house cusp, or also called the ascendant. Now the first house cusp on a birth chart explains how one appears to others on the outside. I once heard it explained as the doorway to the self. It is how others see you. How I've observed the ascendant is that it describes how one goes about or approaches situations or ideas. How we tackle a project or maybe even start a debate. For example, my first house cusp is in Gemini, so I normally appear to take on projects in an almost double-minded, polar manner, always seeing two sides to every issue, and not really taking an exact stand on either one, which in actuality I don't really, but I still have an opinion. But even though I do seem more like a Gemini in some ways, my sun is in Aquarius in the 8th house. Our sun signs really show us more the way in which we react to certain situations. So basically, to break it down, the ascendant is how we initiate, and our sun is how we react. One person I know, he has his ascendant in Capricorn, and he appears to be very serious and just rather serious in general, even though his sun is actually in Gemini, which is which would logically make him seem more playful. You know, you would think that he'd be more playful, more childlike. But he's not really. I mean, he's really probably one of the most serious persons I know. So sometimes our first house cusp can be somewhat of a paradox to other sides of our natures. So with that, so on now to the sign of Aries. And the sign of Aries incorporates much of the same ideas as the first house cusp. Aries, of course, is also the first sign in the zodiac. And the color for the sign of Aries is red, and its music note is C. And the glyph of Aries is interesting. It actually represents the horns and kind of like the long nose of a ram, which is also a symbol of Aries. And the word Aries is actually Latin for ram. So, of course, the symbol for Aries is the ram. It also symbolizes the eyebrows and the nose of the human face. And in anatomy, Aries rules the face. And for those of you with your sun in Aries, stereotypically, you are usually restless, quick-tempered, impatient, but can also be very exciting and talkative and courageous, since you are more of a doer and you're fire sign. So you also tend to be rather optimistic. But since it is the first sign of the zodiac and it has to do with the first house, they can also be a bit selfish, or can be considered a bit selfish. But they're really just trying to survive and maintain themselves. But with Aries, if someone has different planets placed in Aries, the energies of these planets can almost make one push harder for the self and put the self kind of like against life. They're always pushing harder and competing and that type of thing. And with this competing, we get kind of the idea of war, which brings me to the ruler of Aries, which is Mars, which is the last subject I'm going to be talking about for this video. And the planet Mars is so named for the Roman god of war, Mars. And the glyph of Mars is represented by the sword and shield, which has also traditionally seen as the symbol for masculinity. And of course, the sword and shield in this would reflect the idea of Mars and fighting, and you fight with a sword and shield. You stab and you also shield yourself, so you're protecting yourself. And like Aries, the color for Mars is red, and its note is also C. Mars is a very fiery planet in the birth chart. From its namesake, it rules over issues related to power, aggression, violence, competition, sexuality, masculinity, and of course, war. As you can probably tell, the first house, Aries, and Mars are all conceptualized as a way in which we express ourselves, as well as our need for survival. And our human nature, just our basic human nature for competing and winning. So that is all for this video. In my next video, I will be talking about the second house, Taurus, and the planet Venus. So thank you for watching, and please subscribe to this channel, and don't forget to check out my website.